Hello, everyone. This is Domitiana from Research for Life. I hope you can all hear me well. And I just want to say thank you to everyone for being here today. I see we have a lot of you in the chat. I see 50 participants and I see many more joining while I speak. So thank you, everyone. I know it must be really early or really late where you are. And I'm just gonna introduce our speaker. Nabil Ksibi from ORCID is already here. And I think Gabriela will be here in a while if she isn't already. And I just want to thank you so much to our speakers for being here today and be willing to walk every one of you through ORCID today and the second part of this webinar in a week from now. Nabil, I'll leave it to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Dominica. So just as a side note, Gabriela will not be able to make it for today. He's a bit sick, so I'll try my best, let's say, to cover her slides and her topic. And yeah, so this is Nabil Ksibi. I am engagement lead for ORCID for the Global Consortium. I was previously taking care of the MEA region of the Middle East and Africa region. I hope that in this webinar we can touch base on what is ORCID, why we are here, and the vision and mission of ORCID. So we can give it a start, Dominica, right?
Absolutely.
Great. So before starting, I wanted to go through a small introduction regarding persistent identifiers. I see that this is very important before introducing ORCID or before starting to talk about identifiers in general. So persistent identifiers are, per definition, let's say a long-lasting reference to an object or thing that can be, let's say, retrieved online or digitally anytime and anywhere. And from the words, let's say, two words, persistent identifier, uh, for persistent, this is referring to mainly an organization that made a promise to keep it live. Um, that can be, of course, an organization or a system or a platform or any workflow that is really ensuring that this identifier is persistent. Then for the second part of the two words, which is identifier, which is referring to basically a globally unique string or globally unique identifier that is preferably that should be preferably interoperable and accessible and let's say reachable anytime and anywhere. So these two terms in combination are referring to some friends to persistent identifier as PIDs or PIDs. So what can PIDs do? PIDs can disambiguate, and this is the case of ORCID, where the identifier is disambiguating authors and researchers and students and all who, all the contributors that are contributing to the research space. And basically disambiguate their names and then link their contributions according to that name. So I have here on the right an example from Daisy Selemat Sela. So Daisy is a board of member of ORCID. You can see here that she wrote her name in different writings in this section, also known as. So we'll go through the ORCID record, through all the sections, but this is just an example to show how PIDs and particularly ORCID, how it disambiguates names and researchers' names, basically. So here Daisy, as I said, added all the variations of her name. with basically with this chosen name as main name in the ORCID record. So I'm gonna pause a little bit here and check the chat. So you can hear me well and everything should be fine, right?
I have a couple of comments in the chat saying that I can't hear you so much, but I would just asking to those who can't hear well, if you could first double check your settings because it looks other people can hear okay. So if you could check that from your end and then let me know in the chat, and I'll try to pass it on to Nabil again.
All right. Otherwise, I'll try to scream a little bit or maybe talk louder. Great. So please interrupt me if there is any remark or if you cannot hear me well or if it's interrupting like seriously. So back to disambiguation, and as I said, ORCID is the main, let's say, identifier to disambiguate names. And as you see here in the ORCID record in this biography, let's say, section related to the names or the variation of names, we see that Daisy added all her variation of her name under this ORCID record, right? And it will be useful for her and very relevant for her to basically submit research works and publications using this ORCID record because it contains all these variations of her name, and that this is a central point of, let's say, central registry or record where she can add her different writings of her name. In our region, we have this issue or challenge very widely. For example, the name Muhammad can be written in different writings. And this is why basically we have this kind of solutions, that is ORCID, that is helping disambiguating names. Then PIDs link. So this is very important to know that persistent identifiers do also link works and contributions of researchers. So here we can see I think a DOI that can link this publication to basically Google Scholar and where it was deposited. And of course, we'll see how this is, or the persistent identifier for objects is also linked to the persistent identifier for authors and for researchers. So PIDs can also make research fair. So we talked first, on the first slide on interoperability and how this is very important in the research space. So PIDs and persistent identifiers are really compliant and aligned to the FAIR principles, which are the findability, accessibility, interoperability, and reusability. So these are the conditions, let's say, for the FAIR principles for any data or any information to be, let's say, FAIR compliant. It should be findable, it should be accessible, it should be interoperable and reusable. And we will see how some kind of examples how these principles are applied in the open research workflow. And then I really like this code, so I find it on this source from this study, which is really showing the importance of PIDs and the importance of persistent identifiers for objects, for authors, and even for institutions. So it says that the issue of citation standards became important in the online world as well. So studies have shown that within few years of being cited, a significant percentage of web addresses go dead, which is very true, because if we see, I mean, if we recall some web pages or some articles or some studies that we encountered, through our career as researchers or as contributors to the research space, we will notice for sure that some links are not existing anymore, and people are not visiting these links. And there are strong chances that these links are not very linked to DOIs or to persistent identifiers, so that it can be findable and reusable, across time. So just to have some kind of examples of PIDs, the persistent identifiers for organizations, these are a couple of them. So we can start with the ROR. So ROR stands for Research Organization Registry. This is a community-led project to basically develop and sustain and create a unique identifier for every research organization in the world. So these research organization identifiers should be also compliant to FAIR principles and very interoperable when it comes to, let's say, system integration and finding the, let's say, data around the organization and ensuring that the organization is well chosen, and that is the organization that we are looking for. We have also the LEI, the legal entity identifier, but this is more for financial, let's say, institutions and financial entities. We have the GRID ID or GRID database, which is the Global Research Identifier Database. So GRID is also another database of IDs. I think already having a huge amount of identifiers, or huge number of identifiers there. And the metadata there can be used under CC1 license. So GRID can give you this or can reveal your organizational identifier that you can also use in your systems when you have a project or initiative really looking for machine readable data that will help identify your organization or the organizations that are included in your project. The Ringgold as well is a crosswalked ISNI organizational identifier database. This is very inspired from ISNI. So if I'm opening the Ringgold lookup ID and try to find for a name of organization or a Ringgold ID of an organization, and we will see an example on this on one slide, you'll see that this Ringgold ID is very linked to an ISNI ID, and that you can use one of them in your operations or your integration. And this is a very useful example on why we need these PIDs for organizations or persistent identifiers for organizations. So if I'm putting the name of University of Qarawin in Arabic in Google, or I think even if I write it in different writing in the search field here, I will find two different results, even in the first page on Google. So you see that the first result from Wikipedia is University of Al-Qarawin with double Y and I-N. While here, on just in front of that result, we can have Mosque and University Qarawin with a very different writing. So if I go to Ringgold here and see the naming or the organization name that is registered with ISNI and Ringgold, I will find that this is a complete different writing at first place, but I can also find the ringgold ID and then the ISNI ID on the at the end here. So this ringgold ID is very well linked to this ISNI ID, and I can find all the informations and all the information and all the details regarding this institution, like the name, the region, the country, the admin level here, the city, and the type. And this is very valid for any, to disambiguate, let's say, any name of any organization. Then for contributors, means for authors, researchers, students, or any contributor that is participating to the research life. We have this example from University of South Australia. They created LibGuide just to have this amount of information in one place for researchers to basically know what is ORCID, what is Scopus, what is researcher ID. And you can see here that we have one identifier, which is researcher ID, which is now under Web of Science. And we also have ORCID, which is the non-profit and free to use identifier. And now ORCID is used by more than 10 million user and I think 11 million, we reached 11 million. So this is, the ORCID ID is very widely used because this identifier is offering all the conditions of, let's say, the FAIR principles. You can find this ID, you can access this ID, you can include this ID in metadata if you have any operations that you want to put in place to as reporting or scientific dashboard. So it's findable, interoperable, and of course you can reuse this ID. And the idea behind ORCID is to enter once the information and reuse it often. So if a journal will ask me for my ORCID ID, I will give permission once for that journal to read my information, for example, and then I will forget about it. I will just log into that journal with my ORCID ID, and all the information will be synchronized and linked if that journal is having a good integration with ORCID. Then PIDs for contributors. Again, this is an example where it shows that this is very important to have the persistent identifier for authors and for contributors. This publication really, or we have some popular tweets about this publication, where one of them is saying a researcher is asking another researcher, or is saying to another researcher, I'm the 38th author on this publication, and then the second author saying, this is great, but then the first researcher say back that I'm the 38th author called Wang. So this is really creating, this kind of ambiguity if I'm looking for just the name Wang in this publication. So this is why we really need to have the ORCID IDs for all the authors here, just to know which Wang I am looking for, basically, in this publication. This is also another tweet where this researcher is looking for who is WAD from this publication, and this publication is from 1913. This is really showing that the ambiguity or naming ambiguity is a very old issue or very old challenge that basically now is solved with ORCID, and hopefully solved with ORCID, and we will see how in the next slides. So PIDs for contributions, this is very important also to talk about PIDs for contributions. So these are the, or let's start with the right side. So this is the, let's say, physical identifiers that we can find in magazines or books, like the International Standards serial number, or like the ISBN for books. Now, on the digital side or online, we can find the archive ID, and we can find the DOI and the digital object identifier. So for the online story, we can have this example, and this is really the essence or the principle or the basic architecture to link DOIs or digital object identifier or PIDs for contributions to electronic resources. So if we start with the metadata description, and including in this metadata, we have a handle identifier. So handle is the origin of persistent identifiers for contributions. And this is from where is coming DOIs and all the digital identifiers. And so when I'm adding this handle service to the metadata description of this work, and then link it to an URL, of course, I'm adding the URL here. I will have my electronic resources, whether it is sound or text or video. So as soon as this handle service is included in the URL or in the metadata description and the URL, we will find the electronic, our electronic resources findable and having having a kind of persistent identifier embedded in the metadata. Now, if you talk about who is generating or who are the agencies that are helping to assign DOIs and digital object identifiers, we can cite Crossref for publishing and more in the publishing space, and we have DataCite in the academic and institutional side of let's say the publication in general. Here as well, this is showing how let's say PIDs are enabling this interoperability between systems in open research in general, and making the infrastructure or any infrastructure open research ready. So you can see here there is a tweet from a researcher where he's saying that this is very annoying to have yeah, to face challenges when submitting a journal. Why all journals are not using ORCID? So this is showing that ORCID is a very simple way to log into a journal without really entering a lot of information related to past publication or past funding or past or the career in general. So this is the auto update feature from DataCite and Crossref. Here the researcher is of course connecting ORCID to a manuscript or a dataset, and this submission or this entry connects ORCID to DataCite profiles that is enabling the auto update. So if a publisher is adopting ORCID and registering DOIs with Crossref or DataCite, then the researcher will find their work right away on their ORCID records as soon as it is published. And this is also valid for the versions of the work. And this is really creating this automation between Crossref, ORCID, the publisher, and the researcher. Now, if we go back to the definition of ORCID, the basic definition of ORCID. So ORCID is an open global nonprofit organization run and led by the research community. So if I say run and led by the research community, it means that our board of members is really elected by our members, by the ORCID members. And it is very diverse in terms of nationalities. And I think, and from my point of view, this is really representing a big part of the scientific community or the academic community. So that they are deciding on the strategy of ORCID. If the community will say that we no longer need ORCID, then we will shut down the registry tomorrow. So this is really a community-led initiative, and we are following what the community is let's say advising to us, and yeah, thinking about how the strategy will be. Then ORCID provides researchers with unique and persistent, free-to-use identifier. So the ORCID ID that connects them with, reliably and clearly with their research contributions, affiliations, funding, and facilities. And it's also very important to note that ORCID is not an author profile or an authority check. The only check that we are doing is when the user is losing access to their ORCID record. Then at that time, we are asking for a piece of identity like, I don't know, passport or driving license or student card, so that we can grant back the access to that researcher. Then ORCID provides open tools, which are the registry, the ORCID IDs, and the APIs. And these tools will allow transparent connections between researchers, identifiers, and the activity of the researchers and contributions. So if you see this slide, what I really highlighted in green is the basic definition of ORCID, right? Research, identifier, connects, open, and contributions. So if we connect all these 5 words, we will find why ORCID is helping in linking contributions to researchers and to systems. Again, just to highlight that this is very important to know that it's free for the individual. Anyone can, any contributor to the research life can have an ORCID ID. And yeah, this is really to echo the last slide. So ORCID provides persistent digital identifiers that the researcher can own and control, and that distinguishes them from other researchers. So the researcher can connect their ORCID ID with the professional information, affiliations, grants, publications, peer review, and more. And the researcher can also use the ID to share different information with different systems and different platforms, ensuring that they get the recognition of all their contributions, saving them time and, of course, effort, and reducing the risk of manual entries and errors that can generated from that. So then why ORCID? I think this is also a very important slide because it's showing that the researcher name can change through the career of the researcher, basically. And yeah, we discovered that a name is not enough to basically identify a researcher. At first place, I was not very comfortable with the idea. I really like my name. I really want to use my name. But it appears that my name cannot be read by lot of systems, by a lot of machines, by a lot of platforms. So this is why these machines do need a kind of a digital entry or digital identifier to basically link and to admit this information and admit all the information related to that identifier. So you can see here, the researcher can really change the name and according to even the position and the role, or maybe under other circumstances like marriage or migration or retirement, or going from PhD to assistant, from assistant to professor. So this is really helping in updating or adapting the situation or the naming situation of the researcher. So identifying work and linking contributions. I know this is not a very very easy task, especially if the researcher is not part of it. So really we need to have the researcher be aware of what is ORCID, what are the persistent identifiers, just to really know that the machines will only read these kind of numeric sequence. So here a researcher is asking another researcher of what he's doing, and the second researcher is replying that he's looking for an author name that will be very known and relevant to what he's thinking, and that he's thinking that it will be marked in the history books, and this name should be kind of a popular, catchy, or I don't know how he's thinking of this. But then the second researcher said, will that increase your impact factor? Which is a very good question. And then yeah, and then it really shows that the author's name is not very relevant when it becomes to machine readable information and let's say linking information to systems and platforms. So better to have a link or an identifier or a digital identifier that can pull all the researchers' work and publications in a very simple way, than to choose a known name, or a name that we think that it's known, but at the end it will not be. It will be like, it will create an ambiguity. So here's an example of what I was really describing. So this researcher is having a lot of activities in the research space, like speaking at conferences, like the research activities, like writing publications, like teaching. But when it comes to showing and presenting this work to a funder or to a promotion committee, then this researcher should have all the details about their work and about her contributions and all her publications in one and unique place, which is really can be the ORCID ID in this case. And you can see here the ORCID record of Sofia Maria Hernandez, which is the researcher in our example. And you see that it contains the variation of her name at first place, then link to other website and social links, then the country, then so here's saying the sources of these assertions, then some kind of other IDs if there is the need to link the ORCID record to other IDs, the researcher ID, the e-scientist ID, and of course we can add here the Scopus ID as an example. And of course the email address of this researcher. And we really recommend to add multiple email addresses so that the researcher is not losing access to to their record. Here you can see the different activities or work types that are on the ORCID record. We can see that there is the employment, the education and qualification, the invited position and distinctions, the membership and service, funding, research resources, works, peer review, really all the information that the researcher will want to show to a funder or to a promotion committee. And we will see how these assertions are done. So inside the ORCID record, all the actions that should be done from any external system or external platform should pass through the permission of the researcher. So as soon as the researcher is granting this permission to their university, for example, that university can connect affiliation under an affiliation ID, or the university ID will be shown on the ORCID record, sorry. So this ID is the organizational identifier that we talked about, on the first couple of slides. And this assertion can be done from the institution. So as soon as the assertion is done here, the researcher will not be able to modify it. The researcher will be able only to delete it, right? So some kind of other institutions and other organizations are looking for that information as a trustworthy and reliable information, because the researcher basically cannot modify it. Then the funder can do the same thing. As soon as they grant access from the researcher, they can connect grants, including a grant ID, and of course, the source will be the funder name with an organizational ID, just very similar to any other institution in the research space. Then the publisher will also do the same. As soon as they grant permission from the researcher, they will be able to connect publication and assert works to the ORCID record of the researcher, including the DOI of the work, of course. Some data related to the date of the assertion, and then the source as well can be controlled by the publisher here, and they can write the publisher name. And of course, this assertion cannot be modified. It can only be deleted. Right, so before going to the next slide, I wanted to, just a small note on the visibility control, or the privacy of all these items. So each and every item can be controlled, or the visibility of each and every item can be controlled through these three levels of privacy. The first one should be selected when we want to have our work available to public. The second one is meant for only trusted organizations. So this is why we are giving permission here to these institutions, so that these institutions, after granting permission, will be trusted organizations and added as trusted organizations to our ORCID records. And we'll see where it's added exactly. The last option is the visible only to me, or private only to the researcher. So if I want my employment, my funding, and my works to be visible only to me, I will select this this lock for each and every item. So here as well, this is the interoperability circle. So we can see that the researcher is at the center of everything we do, basically, and all the operations that are on this diagram. So here the research institution or the university can connect and collect information from the researcher and to the researcher's ORCID record. But mainly it is a matter of asserting affiliation. A lot of universities that now are members are using OJS University Press, so they can assert publications and works as well. So not only affiliation. A lot of other universities are using, yeah, they managed to integrate with repositories that like DSpace, and they are asserting and pulling information like thesis and dissertations, conference posters, journal articles, and a lot of other type of works. If you go to the publisher, it will be the same thing. The publisher can connect and collect information from the ORCID record of the researcher. And of course, using a publishing system like Editorial Manager, OJS, ScholarOne, and for the non-member systems, eJournal Press, Janeway, or Review. For the member systems, there is an integration ready. So I'm sure that you noticed in some journals, we can have this ORCID ID button or green ID button that will allow us to connect our ORCID ID to the journal. So this is why, and this is how this journal is obtaining this connect and collect activity with the ORCID record of the researcher. Then the funder also will be able to connect and collect information. And in this case, it will be award or grant. And of course, according to the system or submission system that the funder is using. Here in South Africa, for example, the National Research Foundation in South Africa are using ORCID to basically get the ID of the researcher and authenticate the author. Then inside the submission system, you can see where to link the ORCID ID to the NRF submission system. And of course, they shared a statement or public statement recommending the use of ORCID for all the researchers in South Africa. And according to the last stats, I think we have now 90,000 ORCID ID connected to the South African consortium, from which 80,000, almost 80,000 just for the NRF integration. So this is really showing that the NRF submission system is using, is mandating ORCID in a way. Now the interoperability and how the information is flowing for the institution in general. We can see that the researcher can enter once the information and reuse it often from this diagram if of course the institution will authenticate the ORCID ID of the researcher and then display it on their website, showing that this ORCID ID is really authenticated, and this is for that researcher, or this is linked to that researcher. And then they can start asserting work or populating system if they have any central CV system or a profiling system that they use at the university. They can pull this information from the ORCID record to build this profile for the researcher on that system. For the work assertion, like I said, there is a lot of work types that can be asserted to the ORCID record through the API. And as I said, there is a lot of examples of universities and use cases of different kind of information asserted to the ORCID record of the researcher. And this is what is basically building collect and connect. the activity of collecting and connecting information, which basically at the end, if we add a small or a very small step, will do the synchronization of the work between the organization or university system and ORCID. So this is really representing webhooks and notification that the researcher is receiving as soon as there is an update on their ORCID record, and vice versa. If the ORCID record of the researcher is updated, the university system or the institutional system will receive a notification showing that. Then we can see that this workflow is very applicable for publishers, employers like universities or institutions or research centers or laboratories, and funders globally. Now, ORCID to connect your contributions to research, and this is a really great example in Africa. Sorry, where Africa Archive, which is the open preprint platform for African scientists, is mandating ORCID because of this Zenodo integration, which is
But you
also
know what? No.
mandating ORCID. So as soon as the researcher is submitting their work on Africa Archive, and then because Africa Archive and Zenodo are having an integration, and because Zenodo is registering DOIs with DataCite, my work submitted at Africa Archive will have a DOI embedded in it, assigned to it, sorry. And using that DOI, and because of the auto-update functionality, we'll see the work published also or linked to our ORCID record. And this is also valid for any version of this work. So now this is very important to highlight that we are talking about preprints here. So the work that is not already peer-reviewed, although in Africa Archive we are doing a small assessment or submission moderation. Then because Zenodo is registering DOIs with DataCite, we will have a free DOI assigned to our work. So I really recommend this workflow and recommend we explore what Africa Archive is doing and how we can have the preprints published in our ORCID records at the same time at Zenodo with a DOI. So talking about Africa Archive, so the main mission of our Africa Archive is sharing the African scientists' research in African languages, then making the researchers' results citable and apply a CC BY license there so that this work can be findable and shareable and accessible. Then promote open scholarship, open science, and open standards. So as you can see here, the idea of this free preprint platform in Africa really pleased to some repositories and some open science platforms like OSF, the Open Science Framework from Central of Open Science, Zenodo as well, which is a also a preprint repository and very well known in Europe. For Figshare, you can submit your work in Figshare in the Figshare instance of Africa Archive, but this is still not linked to any DOI, or you cannot authenticate with your ORCID ID if you submit via Figshare here. And Science Open as well, you can use your ORCID ID to submit on the Science Open instance or the Africa Archive instance of Science Open. For Chaos as well, you can use your ORCID ID to submit your work there. For PubPub, we are still discussing this with PubPub, and this is a work in progress. So you see here how many platforms and how many repository platforms are using ORCID or mandating ORCID to authenticate authors before submitting the work. Now, it's very important also to talk about search and link wizards. So these wizards can help the user in linking the research works in bulk, let's say, or importing all the researches or the research activities into ORCID from these platforms. I think this is kind of a little bit outdated list, so I'm gonna quickly go to my ORCID records and show you the actual list, because we added HAL from France, and we added OpenAir search and link, and we added the lens. So these are the new search and links that are added to that list, and it's very important to really show you all the different search and links that you can use to link your work and upload your work directly on your ORCID record. All right, so I'm not the one writing on the on the board, so I'm gonna try to erase these lines. Great. So all right, so so who is using the annotation pen to basically write these lines on the screen? All right, so this is my ORCID records. So if I go to the search and link, sorry. Sorry, the internet connection is not very helpful. So please, if you have any question or any kind of remark, please put it on the chat box. It will be a pleasure to reply to this question. And again, this is in French, so you can choose the language here. Unfortunately, we do not have a lot of African languages, but I'm sure that it will come a time where we can have this available in the registry, and yeah, I'll be very happy to see some I don't know, isiZulu or isiXhosa or Swahili in this list. So here, if I want to add some works, so this is the if I start with this one, this assertion, you'll see that this one was done. I think this is through Africa Archive, yeah. And you can see the GUI that we were talking about here, and that the source of this assertion is Zenodo. So all what I did here in this work is just to participate in this, let's say, work. And then as soon as I'd identified myself in Africa Archive and that the work is submitted through Zenodo. I found my, this work here in my ORCID record and with all these details. And same thing for the second one. It was submitted on Africa Archive, sorry, on Zenodo via Africa Archive. All right. So if I want to add other works and see the search and links wizards, I want to go here and click on search and link. I will have this same window like in the slide here, the same one, and where I can find base, the Bielefeld Academic Search Engine, Aritri, Crossref Metadata Search, Department of Energy in the US, DataSite, Dutch National Bibliothek, Europe Med Central. The last, let's say, add here is HAL, ISNI, GALC from Japan, MLA, International Bibliography, OpenAir Explore, Redalic, Scopus, and the Lens. And the list is in work in progress. So there will be a lot of search and link wizards that will be added to this list soon in the future. So if you have your work in Europe PubMed Central, you can just go there, use this authentication or authorization link, and then authorize Europe PubMed Central to basically add or update research activities of yours, like works, affiliations, publications, etc., and read your information with visibility set to trusted parties or trusted organizations. So as soon as I hit authorize here, I will see that Europe PubMed Central is added to my ORCID record as a trusted organization. So if I go back to my ORCID record, so it's very important to know that this authorization box will allow that publisher or that funder or that entity to be set as trusted organization party in your ORCID record, right? So if I go here, I can see here, Europe PubMed Central with today's date. And Europe PubMed Central requested to read my information with visibility set to trusted parties and add or update research activities. Now here, I don't have a profile on Europe PubMed Central, but if I would, it will detect at least the most close name, or it will give me the next steps to link my work or to link my Europe PubMed Central profile to my ORCID ID. So this is regarding search and link. So here, this is a similar example to what I shared on my ORCID record with the source of the work here, the GUI of the work, the description of the work, the contributors, where it's added and where it's last modified. And you see here, the assertion was made from base from the Bielefeld Academic Search Engine into the ORCID record of Gabriela Mejias in this example. Now in thesis and dissertations, Northwest University in South Africa did a great integration with DSpace and ORCID, where you can see here the stats, I think from last year, where the university did interact with the ORCID records of their researchers in basically asserting these journal articles, in asserting these theses and dissertations, and this number of conference papers. Right, and they are looking now to, oh sorry, this is CAUST. So this is a great work from Northwest University, and we have a very similar work from KAUST, I think in this, yeah, in the next slide. So KAUST is King Abdullah University of Science and Technology. They also did a really exemplar integration with DSpace, where they are pushing all these kind of data to the ORCID record of their researchers. And see here an example of one researcher and some couple of assertions done by the KAUST repository. And you can see here that the sorry, the DOI that was used here, for example, for the first assertion is the handle one. The second work is from a DOI, I think, registered with DataSite, and which is also linked to a handle, a handle identifier as well. So the first one is using only a handle identifier. The second one is really linked to a DataSite DOI and a handle identifier. And you can see here the source is KAUST repository. And of course, I cannot modify this assertion. I can just remove it. So just to show you here in my ORCID record that that the work asserted basically from an organization or through the API will not be modifiable. It will just be or will not be editable. It will just be removed. So if I go to the same assertion here, you can see that I cannot modify the work. I can only delete it from here, or maybe fork it to another source or another work. Right. So here, these are three different sources that asserted the same work. I personally did add it here manually, so this one I can edit it. You see here, so I can edit this work. But for the other assertions from DataSite, I cannot edit those one. I can just fork it to other works. And of course, delete them because of some kind of data regulation privacy. And yeah, data privacy and regulation policies. So if I go back to KAUST, so yeah, this is the assertions and the work done by KAUST in terms of ORCID integration in their institutional repository. Now, the membership categories, if you want to join ORCID as an institution and contribute, of course, to what we are doing, because at the end, all the technology and all the work that we are doing is only sustained by the contribution of our members. We reached break-even last year, so now we are really dependent on our members' contributions, and yeah, and this is from where we are having our let's say technology and the services that we are offering. The basic and non-profits category. So to start with, it's giving one access to the ORCID API to integrate a system. And there is no webhooks to, let's say, hit the synchronize step that we saw on the workflow. And of course, there will be some implementation support from the ORCID side for the integration and launching the integration. In terms of analytics reports, the basic member will receive 2 reports per year. And in terms of orientation webinars, so these are the orientation webinar that will really guide the member to integrate with ORCID. So if there is any technical question or any kind of setback in integrating with ORCID, this is the opportunity to ask these questions and to interact with the ORCID staff to basically have your integration complete. For the premium membership, the member will have 5 API accesses. The yes for the webhook functionality so that they synchronize works and get notifications as soon as the work is updated from on the ORCID record. Then the implementation support will be prioritized for premium members because usually they are having, let's say, an integration ready, or they are using, or they're having a lot of data in consideration. So this is why you are giving priority to the premium member integrations in this site. In terms of analytics reports, the premium member will receive a monthly report, including the API usage statistics and traffic. In terms of orientation and technical webinars, let's say the premium member will receive up to 2 sessions or 2 webinars per month. Now, the consortium model, which is the preferred model of ORCID, is offering the same functionalities or the same features or benefits as a premium member, but with reduced costs. So if you are very interested in joining ORCID as part of the consortium or library consortium or a gathering of universities, then this model will be very useful because you will have also consortium leads locally in your country, like here in South Africa, TENET, the Tertiary Education Network, which is the local NRN here in South Africa, the National Research and Education Network, is leading the ORCID consortium as well, along with a lot of other different services like the federated identity, like the basically offering an internet and covering internet for universities and connectivity for universities. Or supporting, let's say, the connectivities for universities. So please reach out if you are interested on any of these models, and we can guide you through the next steps. Now, this is also a slide showing the very importance of the authentication or authentication. Sorry, I'm not seeing the authentication. So yeah, cool. Sorry, so these are 3 examples. The first one, like I showed from EuroPubMed Central, where EuroPubMed Central is requesting to see these kind of informations from the researcher. The second one is from Crossref metadata search, where Crossref is asking to read my information set to trusted parties and to add or update research activities, just like EuroPubMed Central. And you have this Athena RC, an integration in Greece, where this institution is requesting to get my ORCID ID and to add or update information about me, like countries, keywords, etc. So let's say the benefit of having this authentication is ensuring that the ID is transmitted correctly, and avoiding, of course, errors when entering the ID in the metadata, like typographical errors or reconciliation errors. Then it's also important to be aware of what use or what is the use of the permission when it's granted. So this is really important to to keep in mind that any system that want to interact with your ORCID record should go through this authentication box. Now, in terms of privacy, ORCID is really based on trust. So we are offering a reliable registry that can be controlled individually and per item. And that the information is really based on integrity and trust and reliability. It's also important to highlight that this is a community responsibility. So we are trusting the researcher in all the information that are manually added there, and that the community is very well linked to what is ORCID in a way or another. So as soon as you start using ORCID, you are part of the community, and that ORCID is under your ORCID record is under your responsibility as well. Here the privacy slide. So I just reviewed a little bit what are the difference between those three levels of privacy. But here you can see that, well, the first option for any item that I want to control in my ORCID record, or any assertion that I have in my ORCID record, I can set it to visible to public, to everyone, or visible to trusted parties only, or visible only to me. And these are the percentages of the choices of the users in general when it becomes to visibility settings. And here you can see the trusted parties and organizations that I showed in my ORCID record as well. So how to have funders involved, and let's say national bodies and continental bodies involved in ORCID. It's very simple. So as soon as the NRF understood and got the importance of ORCID and collaborated with ORCID, they released this statement recommending the use of ORCID in research and for all researchers in South Africa, highlighting that this is a way to ensure that works are linked accurately and reliably. So, and that is helping researchers to be uniquely identified, and the authors to basically and be the authors and link their works across all systems integrated with the ORCID registry. This is also from NADRE, an initiative in Ethiopia, and this is published in the African Open Science platform, where you can see here that there is a mention about ORCID, and that that there were a workshop and conference addressed to the implementation of persistent identifiers for digital objects, including DOIs and ORCID. I think there is the open science policy for Ethiopia, but I cannot recall it now. I mean, if you really want to look into this information, I can dig into that and provide you the link of that national policy that they made in Ethiopia. Now, the integration, funding, and granting management and grant management systems. So, like I said, the NRF implemented ORCID as an identifier for researchers, and you can see here inside the application for grant. Sorry, that the ORCID ID or my ORCID ID is linked to my submission here, and I cannot modify this ORCID or manually enter this. So this is automatically authenticated from the ORCID API, and that is really helping to avoid any manual entry and synchronizing my profile with my ORCID profile. Sorry, my NRF profile with my ORCID records. So the here as well, the African Academy of Science, where they implemented ORCID in their submission system as well. And you can see here that the ORCID ID is added and linked to the system. And I think that the field is not modifiable as soon as, of course, there is a link behind this where to authenticate the access or authenticate the ORCID record and grant the access to the African Academy of Science. And as soon as that process is done, I'll find my ORCID records here in that profile. So if you're interested, for example, in the KAUST work and how KAUST did that, they basically created and participated in a patch for DSpace users. I think DSpace versions 5 and 6. Yes. So here's the description about this patch. It's kind of a plugin or a code that should be written on the DSpace instance, so that you can do the same thing like KAUST, basically pulling and pushing information and integrating ORCID in your repository. So the PIDs initiatives and drivers, from where that came and how or what are the initiatives that are supporting ORCID. We can cite, of course, the Horizon 2020 and the European Commission efforts around the open research infrastructure and around, let's say, the use of identifiers and the use of and identify works and authors in the research space. We have also TOR, which is Technical and Human Infrastructure for Open Research. And we have also the FAIR principles that I mentioned in the first slides. The FREA project, and you can, of course, read about those, when I will be sharing the materials. You can dig in more on how these initiatives really participated in pushing the use of persistent identifiers and ORCID in general. We have ODIN, which is ORCID and Data Site Interoperability Network. And of course, PIDapalooza, which is a yearly event gathering all the PIDs, let's say, the PIDs lovers and PIDs followers, if I would say it, to share basically the news about persistent identifiers and how these are used in different cases and how this is helping their systems and their use cases. How to get involved? So it's very easy and simple. Learn more about ORCID, create your ORCID ID, and then as an institution, maybe think of using the public API or joining ORCID as a member. As a funder, you can also use these kind of statements to encourage and recommend the use of ORCID among researchers. And of course, as a consortium lead and as a part of a consortium, you can always join the annual gathering that we are doing at ORCID, where consortium leads are exchanging ideas about supporting the community and supporting the consortium members, and how they are managing to do that, basically. And thank you very much. I hope that it was clear enough. Sorry, I'm losing my voice for some in a couple of slides, but now it will be great to have your input.
Yeah, thank you, Nabil. I think this was really, really interesting to hear. And we have a few questions in the chat, which I don't know if you could see them. For example, I'm just going to read a few that I see. There is a question about what is the difference, the key difference between ORCID and other IDs.
All right. So it depends which are IDs we are referring to. So ORCID is the persistent identifier for authors and researchers and contributors only. And there is also other different identifiers like I showed, which are meant for organizations and for objects, like DOIs for objects, and like grade or error for organizations. All of them are in the form of in a numeric form, so that machines can read them, right? But the difference between them is that ORCID is a identifier for authors that is having a separate registry and separate API. The grid ID as well, or the organizational identifier like ROR or GRID or ISNI, are having also a separate API or separate database that you can access under some CC license. But you can use, I can recommend that you can use them in different systems to identify your organization. I mean, regarding the organizational identifiers.
Thanks. I also have a couple of questions about how do you link your email to an ORCID account, which I think it's a question about registering for an ORCID account.
Exactly, yeah. So as soon as you are on the ORCID website, so this one, sorry, I think I didn't copy it at first place, so I'm gonna quickly add it to the chat box here. So as soon as you go to the ORCID website, I'm gonna share my screen again to show you this really quickly. And if I log out from here, and supposing that I'm a new user and I want to register for a new ORCID ID. So all I have to do is to say register now and then enter my name. The last name is optional because in any way you will add all the variation of your name in the AKA section. And then the primary email, I think I used them all. So, so I'll go with org, but it will say that this email already exists. So if your email, if you are already registered with a certain email, sorry, the registration page will detect this and will say that you need to sign in or maybe change this this email. Then I just need to confirm this email, and then that's it. So the next step will be the security notification, the level of security, and yes, I'm gonna go. For example, I don't know if it will detect it. And this one. And I can even add my additional email address here as optional. So if I have an institutional email address that I want to have as a primary email address in my ORCID record, I will add it here and then add my private Gmail or Yahoo email address here, so that if I quit my university or quit my institution, I will always have access to my ORCID record, because I added this second email address or second personal email address as an option to log into my ORCID record. Then for the security, so yeah, it detects directly the name Nabil, and he's saying that there are a couple of other records here with the name Nabil. Are these you? So if I'm sure that these are not me, I will say none of these are me, and we'll continue with the registration. So this is also another verification step to know if we have already an ORCID record or not. Because usually there is a lot of researchers and authors that are creating an ORCID ID for each and every submission, which is not the recommended way to use ORCID, because it should be a unique identifier that you are using for all the submissions. I just need to define a password here. Here another password. And then I just need to tick this one if I want to receive emails for ORCID features or not. Then hit on next. I can define my visibility settings from the start here. So I can choose everyone or trusted trusted organization or only me. And then consent for the terms of use as a user, as a user in general. Then tick the I'm not a robot, hopefully box. Then hit on register, and there we go. I have my ORCID records created. Of course, if internet connection is allowing that. Yeah. The last step would be to verify my email address. So now a verification email is sent to that email address, and with a link that I just need to click on to just verify my email address, and then I can start adding information and activities here.
Nabil?
So, yes?
Actually, the question is they want to know how to add your ORCID ID number on your email signature.
Okay, all right.
Yes, that was the question. The way I understood it. The way I understood it.
Yeah, totally fair. So this is what we are doing as ORCID staff, and this is what I saw basically in a lot of signatures for researchers. So I'm gonna show you how, or if I can copy here. So it's very simple. It's a manual addition. This is what I did basically. I'll try to share my desktop to show you the format here, for example, in an email. Yeah. So if you can see here, this is the email signature.
We cannot see your screen.
Oh, sorry. Okay. So if I go to this one. So now you can see my mailbox, right?
Yes.
Cool. So this is what I added in my email signature. My name, my function, my email address, my phone number, my Skype ID, the ORCID website. I mean, it can be your university website or institutional website, and then at the end, the ORCID record of yours. And it's recommended to add it with the HTTPS and the whole complete address, so that as soon as I click there, or anyone will click there, I will have it. I will open my ORCID record right away.
Thank you. I wonder if you have. Oh, sorry. Did I?
No, just yes, please carry on. I just wanted to show that this is really opening my ORCID record.
No, thanks so much. I was just wondering if you have 5 more minutes for a couple of other questions. If not, we can answer them in the next webinar.
Yes. We can carry on. Of course, if everyone is agreeing with this.
Right. Because I just saw in the chat, the latest question that was asked was, how can I add articles to my ORCID ID?
Great, and this is a really great question. I showed the search and link workflow or process, and I can go through that again if you want. So I'm gonna open my ORCID record here. So the first method is to add manually works, which is not very recommended when it becomes to basically adding works to ORCID. Sorry, I'm gonna log out to the fake ORCID ID that I created, which I will definitely delete after or merge with this one. So it's very important also to know that if you have duplicated ORCID IDs, you can merge them into one and unique ID. And then I'm opening my ORCID record. Sorry, not this one. This is for the stuff admin one. I'm gonna go to this one. So I showed you previously on the presentation the search and link wizards that are really helping in uploading articles and a lot of works from all these different databases and different platforms and systems. But the very first method that you can use to add work is to basically add it manually. Although this is not the very recommended way to add works from here. But if you have, of course, if you have an identifier URL, or if you have a DOI for your work, you can add it here. You can add the citation type from here, the citation, the description, the country, language, and of course here the title and work type. Of course, as soon as I choose here one of the work categories from here, if I go with publication, for example, I will be able to say here if it is a journal article or journal issue or magazine article or any kind of work type from here. If I choose a conference, it will be also another set of choices from here. So this is the manual entry. This is valid, and you can always modify it, of course, on the run. But what we recommend to do is to add works using search and links, these that I described during the presentation. And of course, if you want to add a DOI directly, you can add it from here, and that will link your work to your ORCID record. If you have an archive ID, you can add it and click on that archive ID and add your archive ID from here, and then retrieve the work details. PubMed ID as well. So if you have PubMed ID, you can add it from this field. And then the bibtex file, which will be imported from or uploaded from imported from Google Scholar and uploaded in your ORCID record, because there is no integration with Google Scholars. So the best way is to have this bibtext file imported from your Google Scholar profile and then upload it here in ORCID. So if I click on import bibtext, it will show me this box where I can choose a file in my choose the bibtext file as soon as I download it from Google Scholar, and then with that bibtext file, I will have my work that is on Google Scholar uploaded here in or imported here in ORCID. So these are the methods basically to add articles and to add works into your ORCID record. Does it reply to your question?
I hope it does.
Cool.
There are two more questions if we can, and then I think everyone else, we can answer your questions in the next webinar.
Sure.
So there is a question about how to register an institution at ORCID.
All right. So how to register an institution at ORCID. So this is yeah. I would have the reply to this answer in two parts. So if you want to join ORCID as a member, you can simply go to ORCID and ask about membership. So if I go to the home page here and I say membership, it will open for me the membership page where I can find all the details about becoming a member, the different categories that I explained during the presentation, and of course the main comparison between them, and of course the fees if you want to join as a single legal entity, if you are non-profit, if you are small and startup, these discounts can be applied. These are also the prices for premium membership, and as I said, these are the prices for consortia if you want to join via a consortium. The second part of the question, which I I doubt that this is related to an organizational ID. So if you want to register your organization to obtain an organizational ID, then this is not ORCID that you need to look for. This is the organizational ID that I mentioned during the presentation, like Ringgold or Grids. So if I go to Ringgold here, I will see that yeah, this is their web page, and from there you can basically register for your or contact support to start interacting with them at first place, and then see if your organization is registered or not with an organizational ID, and if not, request from them to register your organization. So this is basically the answer to how to register ORCID, to how to register organization to ORCID.
Thanks so much. I think we can close with, I think, an easier thing. It goes back to adding your ORCID ID to the end of your email. And I think specifically, James wanted to know how he can have the clickable ORCID logo or the little icon that carries the ID in the email signature, if that makes sense.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. So we have all our outreach resources published under CC0 license, I think, or CC BY, so it can be reused by anyone. So if I go ORCID outreach resources and say this, I will find basically links to banners, flyers, infographics, and images that I can use in my signature. So if I go to, no, not flyers, sorry. I go to bookmarks. No, let me do something smarter. I'm gonna say orchid green icon. Yeah, the brand guidelines. So I'm gonna try to share these links as well with the presentation. So if you go here to the ORCID logos, this green icon can be used publicly, right? Anyone can use this green icon, but there is some kind of logos for consortium leads. There's some kind of other logos for members, and these are not these will not be used by this will be used only by members. But you can still download and use this green icon. And these are the format display that you can adapt in your signature. And you can see that here it is displayed, and you can add this green icon. I think there is a link to the Figshare repository where there is all these IDs, all these icons. Yeah. Yeah, so on our Figshare repository, you can find them, you know, even the .svg, you know, format that you can use at your ease, you know, and adapt accordingly. So these are publicly available for anyone to use.
Thank you so much. Is there any other very burning question? And then we're gonna let Nabil go.
I just spotted questions about why manually adding ORCID records, or why manually adding articles to the ORCID records is not recommended. So the thing is that this is going back to the fact that some institutions are really trusting the information that is asserted by the institution of the researcher, or the funder, or the publisher that interacted with the ORCID records. And this is, I mean, if we like it or not, this is bringing more trustworthy and more reliability when it comes to assessing an ORCID record for a grant, or assessing a work according to the ORCID records, or according to the information on the ORCID record of an individual. So this is basically why we prefer that the assertion is not done manually. And of course, the main reason is that we can, you know, enter typos and enter errors when we are entering manually this kind of information into our ORCID records. Yeah, I think with that question we can, and yeah, we can copy all the questions to the next session. It will be a great pleasure to answer them.
Absolutely. I want to say thank you so much, Nabil, for joining us and for staying over time. This was really, really interesting. And thank you for all of you who participated. And I hope to see you all next week on the part 2 of this webinar. And with this, have a really nice rest of your day.
My pleasure. Thank you everyone for joining, and see you next time.
Bye-bye.